Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session on how to make data-driven decisions when growing your CCaaS business. This is with our partners, Cavell. They have been working with us to share industry insights and informed forecasting for the channel and contact center industry. Their data is super insightful and really valuable, and something that we love to share with our reselling partners like yourselves. Today we're joined by Patrick and Finbarr, that they will be running today's session. If you do have any questions during the session, please ask them throughout, and also we will have a dedicated segment at the end of the session too. Great. Okay, so I'll leave you now with Finbarr, who will be leading the session mainly and showcasing the CCaaS data that they found. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Hello and good morning, everyone. So as mentioned, obviously Cavell, we do our research. We're an analyst house focused on CX and UCaaS, and we're going to present today some data from our market evolution report. So this report is primarily created by just going out and speaking to every vendor and service provider we can get our hands on, asking them what they're doing, what they're seeing, and then backing that up with some enterprise research that we do once a year, where we go out and we talk to CCaaS purchasers and decision makers and ask them what they're doing, what they're buying, and those kind of things. So that's really where this report comes from. And obviously, we're going to take you through some things. There's a lot of different concepts, so we expect questions. So there will be time for questions at the end. So do just take note of anything you want to ask and come back to us and we can ask them. Or, of course, if you have questions after the fact, you can probably get in touch with us as well. So just plenty of things to think about. Let's dive in and just talk about the broader sort of CCaaS market. And I'll start off with just sort of some definitions to help you understand Cavell's forecast before I show you the forecasts. I need to give a bit of a preamble so you understand exactly what we've defined before we give you some numbers and you're like, that doesn't seem right. So contact center user agents, obviously anyone who is a contact center using a dedicated piece of contact center equipment, whether it's on premise or in the cloud. We're talking about something that specifically has contact center functionality. Our definition of a cloud contact center agent is specifically about those that are using publicly hosted multi-tenant clouds rather than those using privately hosted clouds. So we include the privately hosted clouds in with the on-premises definition, as we like to draw a line between multi-tenant and privately hosted. Obviously, on-prem includes traditional legacy on-prem and those privately hosted customer data centers. There are also three other interesting definitions which are going to become relevant in the second half of the market data. The first is this idea of agent offset by automation. So to try and calculate the predicted impact of AI on agent numbers in the market this year, what we've done is continue our forecast for growth based on our numbers of agent seat demand, and that's our agent seat number, but now it doesn't necessarily represent an actual seat that exists, but rather the market's demand for that many seats. And then we've combined that number with an offset percentage that we reckon is going to be the amount of jobs that are displaced by automation, and combine those two together to get our actual number of agents that are doing a specific role. In this report, we're primarily talking about two types of automation. So agent assistance, where a piece of technology is deployed to actually just help an agent do their job better, things like auto summarization, call transcribing, etc., as well as AI interaction. So that's where the actual conversation between the customer and the company is replaced with an automated conversation where it would previously have been a manual conversation. So there's a whole other realm of better website, better app, better, self-service that we're not really covering in our market forecast. We're mostly focused on the number of seats and then the interaction with automation and those seats. So let's dive in then to our forecasts. So within the UK, we currently have a market agent as of 2023, just under 910,000. Just under 910,000. And then growing in the next sort of 5 years up to 2028 to just over 935,000. So Still seeing steady growth in the demand for agents. Again, though, this doesn't now represent actual agent jobs, but rather just the demand for agent-like activity at companies. We'll get onto the number of the actual agents we think are going to be in the market in a second. And then we have this penetration of cloud versus on-premise. So we're seeing it quite high now, well above the 45%, coming up on 50%, and then rising in 2028 to just over 70%. Now, cloud adoption is one of those things that we have actually forecast more aggressively in this report than we have done previously. Through all of our conversations with vendors and service providers in the past year, the message is pretty clear that cloud adoption is increasing. More and more people are trying to get their agents into a cloud or a hybrid model. There is still on-premise out there. There are still use cases for on-premise, but the growth in cloud agent seats is accelerating. There's a lot of things driving that trend. One of the biggest things is, of course, the growth in things like automation and intelligent solutions. There is just a necessary cloud component to enabling AI and intelligent systems to work, as most companies do not have the resources to run those in an on-premise deployment. So when you start to get that demand for those cloud solutions, for that intelligent automation package, you start to increase the rate of cloud transition. And that can be seen demonstrated in many ways across the industry. But if you think about the way that legacy providers are even adding the ability to add cloud services to their legacy platforms, to get that upsell, you can kind of see the way the trend is going. It's, well, okay, you have an Avaya, you have a Genesys on-premise solution, but you want this new advanced cloud platform. So you're going to have to mix in the cloud part of that with your legacy on-premise to get the outcome that you want, which is further driving the transition. A lot of companies will move into that hybrid model where they keep some of their legacy on-premise and they have more in the cloud, but the cloud trend is definitely accelerating. So what then does that look like for agent numbers? So you can see on the left, this is our cloud contact center agent numbers. You can see currently we just have it under 400,000 and moving up then to just under 600,000. This is, of course, part of the acceleration in the shift to cloud that we talked about on the last slide. So while the total number of agent demand is going up, the actual number of agents not increasing massively due to the offset, which we'll talk about in a second, but the actual number of cloud agents is increasing by a substantial amount as that shift to cloud accelerates. So the addition of around 200,000 new cloud contact center agents, a lot of those coming from traditional on-premise, and a lot of those also coming from the growth and the building of new contact centers, especially on the smaller end. So a lot of our forecasting shows that smaller companies than ever before are starting to buy what is being sold to them as a contact center license and contains a lot of the features that we would associate with an informal or light touch contact center or that UC plus. So when a company that's much smaller buys that UC plus that has a queue and has agent management, they are buying a contact center platform, which they previously wouldn't have done. And now they are buying contact center agents often deployed through the cloud for the scalability and the cost. So therefore drastically increasing the number of contact center agents in the next 5 years. On the right, then you have our agent offset due to AI. So this is the number of roles that we feel like are going to be reasonably displaced by AI within the next 5 years. You can see it starts off just above 85,000 and then moves up to 160,000, so almost doubling in 5 years' time. The fact is that these automated solutions are coming in, they are making agents more efficient, and that is going to lead to some jobs being offset and being replaced. If you think about different figures from the UK, you read something like HMRC, they put out a report last year, I think it was somewhere between 6 to 9% reduction they were forecasting every year in the number of agents that they employed to handle customer experience. So those sorts of examples are happening across the world. It is being counterbalanced by the increase in new growth in new contact centers or companies expanding their contact centers. So while these jobs are potentially being offset, there is still a large amount of growth in the market so that the agent numbers aren't reducing as drastically as this sort of figure might imply. I think that's just worth noting. So agent offset's happening, seat numbers are reducing, but what is that doing to revenue? Well, let's look at our revenue forecast. So currently sitting around $350 million, just in dollars for comparison across different markets, rising up to just over 550 million by 2028. So we see still consistently solid market growth happening in the cloud contact center market. So both in terms of revenue shifting from those on-premise contact centers into the cloud contact center market, and also increased revenue generated by AI interaction agent assistance. Within our forecast, even though there is an offset number for the number of agents that are being displaced, the reality of the situation is that the revenue that's generated from those companies is not necessarily falling to match the seat number falling. We're seeing new sources of revenue being added. We are seeing alternatives to seat numbers, to user per seat license payments coming in. People are moving to offer subscriptions for AI interaction and agent assistant bundles or consumption-based licensing. And all of those changes are combining together to keep the market value up. And one example I like to refer to, I was speaking to a company late last year, and they said, well, actually the seat numbers at one customer fell by 15%, but the revenue we got from that customer increased by 30%. So when the customer offset and reduced their number of active seats, they shifted some of that revenue that they had retained from not paying those salaries into the automation assistance and those sort of solutions, creating a revenue opportunity for the market. So it's not to say that if we do lose some seats, which will happen, but again, as we said, across the industry, the trajectory is towards the increase, still not huge increase, but slow uptick in the number of seats that are in the market. But where they are being lost, there are opportunities for that revenue to return to the contact center market ecosystem by selling those add-ons, those AI add-ons, those agent assistant add-ons. So that's just worth keeping in mind. So the market is growing, that's good. And let's just talk a little bit about some key trends that we've been seeing across the interviews we're doing. So I'm going to break down the key trends, and then we'll go through some slides that kind of reinforce those trends and talk about the evidence for why we're seeing them and what's happening in that front. So let's just dive in. So at the start, we see AI growth continuing, but use cases not being fully developed. What does that look like from a practical standpoint? So a lot of people are working on new AI deployments, but the actual use cases that are trusted are not yet fully developed. So if you think about where AI is being deployed, AI is currently being deployed still mostly on the non-customer facing back-end systems. So data analytics, security, agent assistance. In most cases, when it comes to customer service, there is still an element of humanity being put between the automation and the customer. Now, that's not in terms of traditional machine learning based chatbots and things like that. Those are still improving, but we're talking not about Gen AI being trusted to talk directly to customers in a completely free-form way. We're talking about AI being used to build better chatbots that operate the way that chatbots have for the last few years, where they have very specific intent-based pathways, and they're being built faster because the tools to build them are improving using AI, but the actual bot itself is still functioning within very specific parameters. Where AI is being used in those cases is for the intent-based analysis and to gather that action profile of what the customer is actually asking. So we're using the large language models to understand what the customer is saying, but not to necessarily respond to the customer in a free-form way, still responding within that traditional chatbot ecosystem. So that's what I mean when I say the use cases exist, but they're not fully developed for the full customer experience suite. There are some that are working. And the cost is also a factor. So one company that I spoke to, because there's a lot of proof of concepts happening on lots of different types of AI happening at the moment, and some of them are just deemed too risky and not being rolled out. Others are just being deemed too expensive, and there's still a question mark over how much companies can afford to pay for AI, because if you're not saving money, you may as well just keep the human agent involved in the ecosystem. One telco in the UK that I was speaking to said look, I looked at the price for this proof of concept, and to employ a human agent to do the job was $15. To employ the AI bot to do the same task was $12 an hour. As these are both per hour, sorry. So why would I remove that agent and go through all of those pains just to save $3 an hour? I'm not going to do that. But then he said, well, okay, but 6 months later, we're looking at automated query caching in ChatGPT. Suddenly the cost of that action might come down. So price as an obstacle is one of those things that's rapidly changing. So within the next year, we expect a lot more of these use cases to actually become solidified. And one of the things that's happening, which is also quite interesting, is a solidification of the vertical propositions of these use cases. So a lot of what is needed to understand intent and sentiment within the industry, and one of the places where the channel is differentiating themselves, is by building specific intent and sentiment based databases for specific verticals. So that means building the bot that can't do free-form answers with Gen AI, but uses large language models trained on healthcare specific keywords to understand the difference between someone who is in need of urgent care and someone who is in need of, self-treatment or just buy something from the pharmacy, etc. And those kind of things to better manage their queues. And there's a lot of interesting use cases that are being worked on in the background, but the use cases aren't completely developed to the stage where they need to be for trust to be established. And there's a lot of other questions about trust in terms of where these AI models are being hosted and all those kind of things that are slowing down adoption a little bit as well. One of the other broad trends that's happening is the convergence of technology offerings is continuing. I have a lot of slides on this later, but briefly just to say that what is included in a CCaaS platform, and a lot of CCaaS vendors are rebranding themselves as CX platforms now, is growing massively. So, it used to be a call center, now it's an omni-channel contact center, and now it's an intelligent contact center that includes AI. And then you start to add in things like workforce management, workforce experience platforms, and really building a full suite that handles CRM, CPaaS, marketing, sales, and all these things to try, and especially on the larger end, to try and build one complete customer experience platform, which is why they started to change the acronym. Now, as we'll get into later, it's not to say that every customer wants this, especially in the mid-market, the small to mid-market. It's definitely not true to say that every customer wants that level of deployment. But I guess what the point for the mid-market is that those technologies are sometimes moving downscale. They are sometimes becoming more available. So it's just worth understanding the trajectory of convergence and how that's affecting competition in the space. Another trend from service providers is that the SME focus for the service provider industry is continuing to grow. What does that mean? That means that there is more appetite from the SME for customer experience solutions, especially in that UCaaS plus, that call recording, agent management, queuing, sort of contact center light solution. And there is just a continuing growth and demand for those companies to start delivering more to their customers in terms of customer service. The main driver for this is technological awareness. So we did a massive survey of UK customers, and one of the things that came back through those discussions was that there is a large awareness now of the capabilities of some technologies like ChatGPT, for example. And it's really sorry, just go. Sorry, that is my dog making an unexpected entrance into the room. So there is really a broadening expectation and understanding of what technology is capable of. And there's a growing frustration, even when you're dealing with a small company, that ChatGPT can do X, why can the chatbot on this website not give me a good service? And that kind of pressure is extending across the entire market, which is putting pressure on companies of all sizes. But I think for the first time, a lot of small companies that have previously been able to dodge the bullet of customer service expectations are getting more pressure. And that's then leading to them demanding or asking for more customer experience solutions, which is tied into our forecast where we see agent growth happening in that SME market, because those companies are realizing for the first time, yes, we need a contact center agent, and also the technology is being made available to them via the cloud that they can actually get a reasonable a reasonable, reasonably capable contact center. That is a volume-based business, sell a lot to a lot of small companies, but there are a lot of small companies, and some of the service providers we've spoken to are doing they're doing good revenue by selling off-the-shelf packages of certain solutions to those SMEs in bulk and making good profit that way. The fourth trend is that focus is shifting a lot more towards business outcomes, away from technical discussions, and the sales targets are shifting as well from technical discussions to C-level. Almost every service provider we spoke to agreed with this on some level. The general pressure is that the technology solution is becoming more complicated as you start to add in more features, more AI, more of those capabilities, and the criticality of the customer experience platform to the business also grows as you have convergence of these technology offerings, because it's then doing more for the company that was previously. Because of that, the discussion of migration becomes much more painful because more business units have to migrate, and also the goals of what the outcome of the transition is shifts to being more about focusing on that business goal for the business, because if you're going to do a large scale shift, you need to understand exactly what it's going to end up resulting for the business, which means there's a lot more discussion at the C level, and also just a broadening out of who is involved in the as a stakeholder in a customer service platform purchase, because the more it starts to matter to marketing, the more it starts to matter to sales, the more you start to have a broadening out of lots of different voices getting involved, rather than it just being the traditional customer service manager or technical IT department making a decision. So that's continued to shift, and AI and complexity is one of the reasons that is changing. And then the fifth thing, which I think I've kind of already talked about a little bit, is that the advance in automation is not directly leading to an immediate huge reduction in the number of agents. So a gradual fall off is what is predicted. And Cavell, we have some like internal, they're not internal because they're in this report, but we have some like theories about where the market will go and capabilities of automation, which we'll run you through in a minute, that kind of look at what will be possible within the next 5 years, and then asks a question as to what people will actually want in the next 5 years. And I think that's very interesting to talk about and think about from a market perspective, because automation is rapidly getting to the point where we can replace a lot of agents with automated systems. And if you think 5 years into the future, that number will be incredibly higher. So the question we get asked constantly in meetings is, do we think that is going to happen? And I mean, the spoiler answer is not completely, but a little bit, but we'll get into it a bit more as we go through this presentation. So let's just talk a little bit about the state of the market and some trends. I think the first thing I want to talk about is just how the CCaaS landscape, and you can see I've changed CCaaS to CXaaS, which is also still pronounced CCaaS, which is good because you don't have to change how you say it. But the whole point is that the marketplace is shifting to include a lot of different providers. And we have on the left and the right our traditional CCaaS and contact center providers providing legacy, providing cloud-based contact centers. And then in the middle, you have a broad range of other companies that are starting to get into this marketplace, either for the first time or expanding their reach. So we're seeing almost all of the UCaaS providers starting to offer a UCaaS plus solution, or even sort of a mid-market contact center solution targeted at their solid UCaaS base right in the middle of the market. We're seeing a lot of point solution providers who previously offered call recording, for example, starting to offer more customer service tools. We're even seeing the introduction of companies like Sprinkler, who previously did social media monitoring, then now moving into the space because of how important social media has become as a channel, and now offering a full sort of stack contact center solution via integrations with partners and those kind of things. And then we see the hyperscalers, the Amazons, the Microsofts, Salesforce as well, starting to enter into that CCaaS space too, as well as the CPaaS providers who also want to enter into that space. So really the message of what is happening in the vendor landscape is that a lot more companies are trying to get into that CCaaS space because they already own a part of what is now considered to be a broad CCaaS platform. They either own the company data, or they own one of the solutions that is needed for CCaaS, or they own all of the infrastructure and the collaboration. And then they're saying, okay, well, why shouldn't I own more of that data? Why shouldn't I be able to build the better AI that does everything for these companies? And I think it's interesting as well, especially with the relevance of this call, just to note that some of these companies bring different providers, service providers, and different channels that aren't previously the ones that you would have been competing with. So when I talked to Sprinkler recently, they are trying to get their customers or their channel partners who have for years been selling social media monitoring and social media interaction platforms into selling other types of CCaaS. So, if they succeed, then in a few years' time, the person who comes across in your RFP might be someone who previously came from a social field. And of course, depending on the industry you're selling into, that could be a very strong competitive proposition. So it is just worth noting that when one of these, we'll call them, I call them left field, but when one of these providers that comes in it from a different space enters the market, they do bring in a broad range of different channel partners. You could think about Microsoft bringing in a large amount of IT providers who aren't strong on the voice side, but they are strong on the automation, database management, and those kind of things with them. Which presents an interesting challenge and something to watch as we move forward. So then let's talk a bit about convergence. So when we were building this slide and when we were thinking about what convergence in technology looks like, we kind of had a goal, which was to take everything we could think of as fitting within a full CX platform and just put it on a page. And, you start to think, okay, well, what belongs in there? So you have all of the channels, you have all of the collaboration, the UCaaS, then you start to add in things like workflow management, you start to add in customer journey management, agent management, and then workforce engagement, workforce management. Add onto that a layer of marketing tools, sales tools, a layer of development integration, data intelligence, and a data platform, and even sort of broader infrastructure, network management, security, fraud. All of these sort of solutions start to enter into the environment. And, I have had discussions with CCaaS providers saying, okay, my customers are now asking me to take on more of a security burden, more of a fraud detection burden. So should I be selling that solution? But I don't think I have the experience. It's worth noting that when we put this up, there's two very important things to consider. And the first thing is that not every channel partner is capable of selling this. And the second thing is to say that not every customer wants this. So one of the things we say when we do this, and I have an animated version of this that I have done a few times, which I won't do today, but where I just start deleting stuff. And I said, tell me when to stop, tell me when your customers are happy. And every time I do that with the service provider, they stop me at a different point, right? Or they say, well, you shouldn't have deleted that because my customers need that, but you can get rid of this. And what I'm getting at is that this expansion of covering everything, especially if you're serving the mid-market, most people don't need all of these solutions. But depending on the vertical you're serving, you might be surprised at what else you could sell them. Because some verticals, even though they have smaller contact centers, are looking for more advanced tools. And again, that ties into that verticalization of AI and things like that, where people are building very specific verticalized AI platforms to service the needs of their industry, whether that's healthcare or finance or those kind of things. So it is very much like customer segment and industry developed exactly what they want to buy. But the fact is that these bigger platforms are starting to integrate all of these capabilities. And this is kind of what the biggest CCaaS platforms are going to look like. And there may even be other things that enter into in the broader convergence in a year or two's time. So I would expect this to continue to be disrupted. I think we have CRM on here, but there could be even more coming in from a customer data platform and those kind of things. So this is more just to reinforce the trend that I was talking about in terms of how the stakeholders that are involved in the decisions are broadening out quite a lot. So previously, I think years ago when we asked this, IT and technical came much, much higher, but then it started to shift. So we have the exec team coming in, comms management, line of business teams, and sales teams. And really just to emphasize that contact center sales has become a much broader proposition involving more of the executive team. And this sort of started to accelerate even more as the technical proposition gets more complicated, because you can't explain the technology as well as you can explain the business outcomes to the C-level team. And also, the more complicated the technology is to deploy, the more disruption, therefore more the executives and the C-levels need to be involved in making sure the business follows through with it. There is also an element of IT teams not wanting to disrupt the technologies they know and replace them, but that's that is starting to fall off as the gains available from the technologies do start to grow. So kind of reinforcing the convergence discussion, I just wanted to talk about channel partners themselves. So if we think about what a large contact center deployment looks like on that slide 2 slides ago, then we start to think about what skills are actually required to sell that platform to a company. So do you have a sales team that is an expert in the CCaaS deployment? Have they previously just been selling UCaaS? What skills do they need to be able to sell that CCaaS deployment? Do you have the regulatory and legal expertise to handle the questions that are going to necessarily arise about customer data storage and data protection and fraud? Do you have those omnichannel skills to handle a social media platform, if that's what your market segment is asking for? Can you do customer journey analytics across websites and things like that and integrate those findings into the contact center? Can you handle customer data? Do you have AI expertise? Do you have data scientists to handle all of the information that's now being generated by the new system? And then can you take that data and use it to better train the agents and better train the salespeople and better train sort of and handle the workforce as its needs become apparent? Right now, again, tying back to the idea that not every customer wants to buy that full contact center picture. Equally, not every contact center partner needs to have all of these skills or be experts in all of this. But we are seeing a lot of interesting partnerships spring up between service providers. So one service provider, for instance, might be more of an IT legacy provider and understand customer data management, security, and all of those database sides of things. And the other partner in the deal will understand more about CCaaS, more about voice, and those two partnering together to offer one robust customer data platform combined with a CX. So that's an interesting trajectory that's happening. But really, this slide is it's a challenge to people listening that do you have the necessary skills to sell the contact center deployment that you want to, right? And what are your gaps, and what is being provided by the vendor that won't be provided forever, or where can you make the margin in professional services? Because as the solutions grow more complex, so does the skills needed to sell it. And we'll get into it in a minute as to what the channel looks like for CCaaS, but from a lot of the discussions we've been having with vendors, and one of my favorite questions to ask in the past sort of 6 months, whenever someone launches a new CCaaS platform, is I ask them, how much of your channel has the skills to sell this, and how much are you helping them? Those are my 2 favorite questions. So, a response I got from one vendor, I think 4 or 5 months ago, they said, realistically, 30% of our channel could sell this as well as we do. Another 30% could sell this with a lot of help from us. And then the last 40% couldn't sell this. And we don't know, we need to work with them to figure out how we can get them into a position where they can start to think about selling this. So that kind of gives you an idea, and that's for an established UCaaS vendor who's starting to sell, call queuing, agent management, a little bit of call recording, AI and transcription, and summarization services. But they're already looking at the fact that potentially 70% of their base isn't set up to sell it by themselves, 30% could sell it with a lot of help, and 40% can't sell it at all. So that kind of gives you an understanding that as we move into this more, interest in CCaaS, it is still a differentiator for the communications provider space to be able to sell that contact center solution that is being rolled out by lots of different vendors. And that is still a way you can differentiate yourself, by having some of these skills, figuring out what your market segment wants from you, and then delivering it. So moving on, I put up this slide and this data. So this is from our survey of telecoms buyers across Europe and America, and really just asking them, are you buying contact center license, and how much of your company has a contact center license? And you can kind of see that even at the small companies, the numbers that are saying, yeah, we have at least one contact center license is a lot higher than a lot of people would expect. And the reality is that a lot of these companies, especially on the small end, maybe for the first time, have been turning into and buying a contact center license. And maybe it isn't that full fat contact center license that the larger companies would expect, but it is something that we would recognize as a contact center license based on the definitions we gave when we asked this question. You know, does it have a dedicated agent role? Is it, you know, solely for interacting with your customers, that kind of thing? And the answer was yes, these people have a contact center license. So there is a broadening out of the adoption of contact centers to include a lot more in that small and mid-market, which further reinforces that trend. The SME focus is continuing to rise. And we've tested these figures when we've talked to people about it, and they say that the trend is still continuing. So we didn't ask the survey question again, but we know that it's continuing because we've talked to people about it, and they say that the growth in the SME is still continuing. So returning then to that idea of the channel. So most of you probably don't know it, but Cavell has something called Channel Insights, which is a platform that we built, which we added loads of channel partners to every single URL we could find. And then we scrape those websites and we do profiling on them based on what services they offer, what vendors they sell. And of those, we have to think about 45,000, maybe 50,000 in the database. Only 11% of those 50,000 IT channel partners were selling CCaaS. And of those 11%, half of those were in the US. So if you think that in Europe, there must be, you know, well over 15,000 channel partners, and maybe 5% of those are selling CCaaS according to our platform. So, you know, that's kind of putting things into perspective. Sorry, I think I said Europe, I meant the UK and Ireland. So we don't actually deal with France and Germany yet for this data, but this is kind of reflective, we think, of the rest of the market. So you think about the amount of companies that are actually set up to sell CCaaS, that number is not as high as maybe some people expect when they think about how expansive the technology is and how popular the technology is. And really, that's just saying that, you know, reinforcing the idea that selling CCaaS is still a differentiator for resellers. So combined with the idea that vendors don't even think their entire channel base, if they're getting into the CCaaS market, is equipped with it. It's also just worth noting that of the entire IT channel, and this database includes everyone who's selling printers to selling security, you know, to selling Office 365, the number of those that are actually equipped to sell CCaaS is quite low. Then also to reinforce that is the chart on the right, where we looked at the big sort of collaboration platforms who have solid roots in you know, UCaaS and also in traditional IT. And of those, even there's not a huge amount of overlap with the CCaaS capabilities and those who are selling collaboration. So Zoom was oddly high. I just think they have a lot of communications providers within their channel base. But then you look at the Ciscos and the Microsofts, actually a decent chunk of those channel base is not equipped to sell CCaaS. Just further reinforcing that while the perception from within the industry might be that CCaaS is, you know, broadly available, lots of people are getting in to sell it, you know, we haven't actually reached the point where lots of channel partners are able to sell it. There is still that opportunity to differentiate by selling CCaaS. I'm going to talk about automation just a bit, and just sort of how Cavell is understanding automation based on our discussions with vendors and service providers. And this slide is really demonstrating the 4 stages that we've gone through of the contact center. So starting with a call center, voice-centric, all people cared about was cost reduction and answering the phone quickly and wait times. And everyone was a human agent. Everyone was talking directly to the customers. Moving then into the omni-channel, so adding in multiple channels, adding in chatbots, changing our metrics a little bit. Then moving into an experience center where what channel it is doesn't matter so much as what service is provided. You know, you're still trying to keep costs low, but you're kind of thinking about response time, resolution time, those kind of things, and using more holistic metrics to understand whether it's working or not, starting to add automation. And that's kind of where we are now for a lot of companies. We're at that experience center level where they have lots of channels and they're doing a little bit of automation, but kind of moving into that intelligent experience center paradigm, which is captured in the diagram on the right, where, okay, so channel doesn't matter anymore, but we're actually looking at integrating a lot of this data into other parts of the organization via a data intelligence layer. We're starting to use more holistic metrics alongside staff metrics and customer metrics. So you can start to look at, are my staff happy? And how do difficult customer calls affect my staff? Because obviously churn is a huge challenge for a lot of contact center operators. So understanding staff better and combining that with data on customers leads to a lot more holistic metrics about how customers and staff are interacting, which can reduce churn. And then also just adding a lot more self-service, but also adding a lot more other employees who haven't traditionally been contact center workers into the mix to handle specific queries or rushes and those kind of things to reduce wait time. So there's a lot of talk about how we bring in someone who's only going to spend 20% of their day answering queues on a contact center, but that might be the peak time of the day when wait times go higher and you can route it directly to their mobile phone or something like that. There's a lot of discussion about bringing other resources into the contact center ecosystem. And then that diagram kind of captures everything. It's not just traditional UCaaS, traditional CCaaS. It really is collaboration platforms getting integrated, employee management getting integrated, bringing in CRM and data management systems, bringing in financial management, just to really bring that data into a central ecosystem where everyone can draw on it to provide better customer service, to provide better sales and marketing, and all those kind of things together. And this is reflected in our survey, which kind of demonstrates that case resolution, automated case resolution, is solidly growing. So you can see that in the US, over 40% of companies reported that 50% of their cases are being resolved automatically. And that is probably going to grow in the UK and Europe as well. And then in every company pretty much, especially in the US, said that this is going to continue to grow. And really that is kind of reflecting the trend that automated case resolution is continuing. And I mean, there was a really great report that I think people read it if you have the chance, that HMRC put out on their own customer service last year, and their predictions for how many tickets and things like that they reckon they can automate with a better app, with a better website, was well, I think above 30, 40, 50%. Now they're not predicting that they need to drop agents drastically to match that. They predict a gradual fall off in numbers, but it is just worth noting that a lot of companies are turning to that automation to start resolving tickets. But there are a lot of trends that indicate when that happens, ticket resolution will continue to rise. Cavell did a really great survey of consumers in the UK last year. It's available for free from our members portal, which I'll give out the link to later on. We surveyed 1,000 UK consumers about their opinions on customer service. And two things came out that I think are very relevant to this automated case resolution discussion. The first one is that over half of the people who responded said they have customer service tickets that they haven't, or customer service issues they haven't bothered to deal with because they would have had to deal with a customer service system and it wasn't worth the effort to get the problem resolved. So that 50 to 60% indicates a massive number of people who might start coming out of the woodwork when automated case resolution gets better, when customer service starts to get better. The other thing that came out was that depending on the nature of the query, because we asked a lot of questions about how would you like to talk to a company when X is happening. The second that things became complaint focused or urgent, the preference for speaking to a human being, the preference for phone calling drastically increased. So yeah, people will be happy to log into a website and handle their account updates and things like that through an automated system. But the second you add an element of urgency or an element of dissatisfaction, the phone still takes massive preference. So even if automated case resolution does increase by these rates, then we're still going to see a large increase in the amount of actual customers still coming forward wanting to speak to a human being. So we think that the preeminence of the human being is still very important, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more on this slide. So this is this isn't a tangible slide backed up by market data. This is Cavell's kind of like hypothesis slide for where we're going with automation in the future of the contact center and where we might end up. So you can see there's 4 phases here, ending with 2 ideas called the production line contact center and the boutique contact center, which I'll talk about in a second. But generally through this, you can see on the left-hand side, we start off with a fully manual contact center with a little bit of self-service, and then we start adding in automated interactions in the light blue and increasing the amount of self-service that's happening, and then adding also in this factor of people who would have been agents that are now tasked with watching what the automation is doing. And I've seen a lot of demos of that in the past year. So it's an agent who's sitting back, watching all the chats that are happening with all the different chatbots, being flagged when one chat takes a negative sentiment and the chatbot can't resolve it, and then has the ability to immediately jump in and say, hi, I'm taking over. Look, I can see you're unhappy. Let's fix this. That continues to grow then, and we get less people actually engaging directly with customers. We get more self-service, we get more into automation. And then we get to a point around phase 4 where the capabilities of the system get to the point where we probably can automate every single customer service interaction if we want to. So we're talking about, and I haven't put years on this because it's not worth it. It's not worth it. We don't know exactly where things are going to land. But you can imagine a position in 3, 4, 5 years time where we trust Gen AI, where we understand it, where the guardrails are really developed. And then we get to a point where you could put a Gen AI chatbot IVR in front of all of your customer service, and 9 times out of 10, or maybe 90% success rate, it will get your customers what they want and it'll do it fairly efficiently. And you can make that choice. And if you do, you'll end up in what we call internally the production line contact center. And I have heard from vendors that some fast-moving goods companies have been asking, how do I do this? How do I build a fully automated service that will handle everything and it's just going to do returns and refunds and that's fine? But realistically, and Cavell's forecasts take this into account, as well as all the discussions we're having with service providers, we never actually get to that point because the drive for voice, the drive for human interaction being a defining marker of the quality of customer service will push a lot more companies away from what they can automate to keeping their human agents in the contact center. And that's the idea of that boutique contact center on the right, which is that even if we could automate them all away, we won't, because once things get urgent, once things get critical, human beings want to speak to a human agent to get that empathy. And the fact is, especially in Europe, a lot of all the AI systems have to disclose when it is an automated conversation. And I guarantee you, and this is a little bit backed up by our research, that the second that the thing says this is an AI generated conversation, the person is not going to feel like they are taken care of as well. They're not going to feel as empathetic. It's going to feel more hollow. So that's why a lot of the focus is still going to be on making agents more efficient as versus replacing agents, because ultimately the customers are going to want to connect and feel like they're getting that high quality human-led experience. So that's kind of when we get to the capability that we can automate, it's not necessarily to say that we will. And I mean, at Cavell, we have that limit of, I think a hard limit of about 50% of the agent numbers based on where they are now will still be kept around in the majority of companies. Because although you've made your agents more efficient, you still want to use those agents to handle customers, to make customers feel appreciated. And I think companies that go further beyond that, and we are seeing friction with current AI systems being deployed, will face more pushback as people get tired of dealing with those systems. But for some, thinking about large retail and e-commerce websites where most of what you're doing is just returning something, do you care if it's automated? It might just be faster, easier to just hit a button, have it automated. But for a lot of us, when you're phoning up about the power going out or your doctor or anything like that, you're going to want to speak to a human being at the end of the line. So that's where Cavell's kind of hypothesis of automation is, which I think is quite interesting to talk about.
Questions after that session? No? No questions. Stunned into silence. I guess the thing for me, which stood out mainly, is that there's only 11% of advertising that they have CCaaS. I think that really highlights the opportunity that we have in the UK if we're not offering that to our customers, and adding that into our technology stack, I think is an integral part to enable business growth.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it just feels like there's still a real opportunity to grow into that space. And when you meet growing demand with growing capability, you have that opportunity to be one of the people who takes the lead and builds the capabilities to deliver that service, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's been a few comments come through saying that the barcode isn't working. It doesn't seem to be active on your
Okay,
slides.
I'm gonna have to go and talk to someone about that. But we can sell. I think Patrick has put the link to the members portal in the channel now, so you can just click that directly. Or if you don't have time, I mean, just go to cavell.com. It's pretty clear. You can find it through there. If the feedback link isn't working, I don't know, just send me an email or yell at me on LinkedIn or something like that.
You can also get in touch with us and we'll refer you if you've got our information already.
Yeah, if you have any questions after
yeah.
this, I mean, we're more than happy to spend some time answering some emails or responding in that way as well.
I think that ends for this session. So thank you everyone for joining.